think the crux of the matter is that Australia, since 2011, has been severely restricting a much less dangerous option for people who want to take nicotine, while the deadly option, cigarettes, has been readily available from about 40,000 outlets. Nobody's been able to justify that, and that's the crux of the problem we're dealing with. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Webber.
I realise you're over time. I think our submission speaks for itself. Look, the biggest question here is actually what policy do you want, and what health issues do you need to reframe? Our biggest issue is this is a health issue that's now turned into a criminal one.
Thank you. And Dr. Martin?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. As we know, at the start of the year, the government prohibited the supply of non-medicinal consumer vaping products. The consequences of this ban have been disastrous, with 9 out of 10 vapers having already rejected the prescription model and instead sourcing their products from the black market. With around 1.5 million Australians now vaping illegally, the bans have created the second largest illegal drug market in the country after cannabis, and a massive new front in the war on drugs. The nationwide value of the illicit vaping market is estimated to be in excess of $2 billion. Battle for control of this trade has resulted in serious criminal violence, with over 70 fire bombings and multiple homicides witnessed around the country in the last 12 months alone. The response so far has not been to change tack, but rather to double down, with yet more onerous restrictions introduced in March on popular flavours and vaping devices that will do nothing to increase the appeal of the prescription model. We're also seeing the same tired tactics and cliches witnessed previously in the war on drugs. We have tens of millions of taxpayer dollars flowing into supply-side prohibition and press conferences touting record seizures and supposedly serious blows against organised crime. We know what happens next because we've seen it time and again with other drugs that have been criminalised. Law enforcement does not and cannot restrict access to the point that consumers who want these products will be precluded from getting them. Rather, markets adapt and supply goes underground, where it is even more difficult to police. The illegal products that are supplied by the black market are unregulated, meaning that they are more potent, more addictive, and more dangerous than their legal alternatives. Increasing penalties and heavier policing do not stop criminal actors entering the market. They simply allow them to charge more for their services and increase the profits available to organised crime. Fortunately, we do know what works in reducing drug-related harms. Retail licensing, risk proportionate taxation, strictly enforced age restrictions, plain packaging and bans on advertising, as well as public health campaigns have successfully reduced rates of both teen and adult smoking and alcohol consumption over the last decade. These successes have occurred without prohibiting these products and generating billions of dollars for organised crime. I therefore urge the committee to heed the lessons of the war on drugs and adopt a similarly pragmatic and realistic approach to the regulation of vapes as we do with other adult consumer products. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I will be passing the call to Senator Urquhart.
Thanks very much, Chair. I might start off with, where's he gone? Mr. Webber, you've disappeared, I think. Yes. Are you there, Mr. Webber? Ah, there you are.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. You just disappeared for a moment. And
I just took my face off there.
That's all right. So I'm just, the question I want to ask you specifically is, why have law enforcement agencies struggled to contain the rise of illicit vaping products?
Well, firstly, it's not on our radar, regardless of the money that's been allocated for law enforcement. It just hasn't translated. There's no commissioner that's been there, and there's no focal point. There's no training as well. And I do take on board what the good doctors say in regards to prohibition. But in saying that, we'd like to go down a proper regulatory model, a licensing model such as that we have with liquor. But again, that doesn't occur at the present moment. So for us, it's just not visible. Also, we have a huge recruitment and retention issue across the entire country. Like all industries, we're struggling with recruitment. but even more so in policing because we have an ageing police population, extremely hard workloads, and we're the universal 24/7 problem solver. So I think our question, and you raised that in a roundabout way, is that what do the government want out of this policy? For us, it's created a crime. I never thought 5-10 years ago I'd be actually even discussing any of these issues about illicit tobacco or vaping, but yet we are sitting here talking about it now. And it is, as the good doctor said, this is a real industry for crime, organised crime. We're actually putting more people in harm's way for the health issues. Law enforcement don't have the propensity or either the inclination to actually enforce it at the present moment because there's no structure around it. And we, to be honest, we don't know what to do because there is no clear guidelines. So there needs to be a harmonised model across the entire country where it tells us, hang on a minute, you need to be a fit and proper person to actually hold a licence to sell vapes or tobacco. You actually have to go through a course in regards to selling it to the appropriate people. Age restrictions, also restrictions in regards to the quality and where it's produced from. And police could come in there and enforce it like we do with liquor right now. Come in and say, hang on a minute, where's your licence? You don't have a licence? Here's a ticket for $50,000. Also, the owner of the premises gets a ticket for that as well. We confiscate all that illicit vapes, tobacco, and therefore it puts, and also there'd be a reverse onus for them to prove that they actually had the entitlement to sell and also progress that. So for us, it's a huge issue. You know, and one of your previous speakers before highlighted that he saw kids walk across the road in front of a police car. It is not visible to us. We are not trained in this, and it is not our bailiwick at the present moment. It is not something that we're focusing on. Not to say that we want to go down an any state path, which I know other previous people have mentioned, but we need actual proper training, education, and also the capabilities to actually enforce this. That is a licensing regime with tickets, and we can make this work. But at the present moment, my members across the board, this is not our focus. It's domestic violence, it's cyber crime, it's break and enters. And that's the other thing too, and I'll keep coming back to this point. We do not have enough police officers. We have huge vacancies across the entire country. This is not something for us to focus on unless the federal government, as I've highlighted in our submission through the Police Federation of Australia, they need to actually formulate a strike force, a task force, with every agency involved, including the ATO, so we can actually go out there and stop it at its source. But it needs to be funded by the federal government, because if you ask the states to do it, they're going to say, no way, our priorities are back to domestic violence, break-in-enters, dealing with serious and organised crime, even though there's huge issues in Queensland and Victoria at the present moment with this.
Yeah, because I was just going to say, surely that's the number of police are a state, and it's a different jurisdiction, I suppose, each around the country. But you've actually eloquently put, you know, what you think the federal government could do there. Do you think, Mr. Webber, that the reforms that will come in with part of this legislation, or sorry, the legislation, the reforms around the legislation, will assist police in enforcement actions, or do you think it's still the same story that you've just outlined?
I think it's the same story. The funding, and please correct me if I'm wrong, I think it's about 180 million, but that hasn't translated on the ground.
Yeah.
Again, if you ask any police officer in your local electorate or across the country, what do they do with illicit vaping? We wouldn't know. And on top of that too, we walk through. I was walking through the streets today, and I saw numerous people taking vapes. Police officers at the present moment do not have the time to actually sit there and go, oh, do you have a prescription of that? Where is your prescription? Also, we don't have a system where, so what do? We confiscate it. Where do I book it up? What actually do I do with it? I'm taking away someone's something that they purchased. So there has to be some protections there for police officers as well. Also, if I'm taking it away, do I issue them a fine? Now, where does that fine go? Where's the structure behind that? And the one thing, all the state jurisdictions are absolutely bleeding in regards to resourcing at the present moment. This is not their focus. So if the federal government really wants to make this policy and then reduce the harm to the community, they have to have a proper structure in place, but also fund it as well. You're on silent, sorry.
Senator Rocket, you're on mute.
And we've lost your audio.
She's on mute.
I'm not sure why that happened. I hope, yeah, okay, sorry.
There we go.
Now I'm going, Mr. Martin, can you talk to me about what's the experience on the ground that you're noticing when it comes to enforcing laws around illicit vaping products?
Well, I'm a criminologist, so I don't have a police department at my disposal, but I think it'd be the experience of any person walking down the street, any high street in the country. It's very easy to find illicit vapes in any of the convenience stores we see around, and we've got regular updates from and public media statements from Border Force, from state policing agencies that there are seizures going on all the time. And I'll just note that the largest seizure ever of vapes, Mr. Butler reported around $15 million worth of vapes. If the vaping market, if these estimates are accurate, and they're from the Victorian Parliamentary Budget Office, the largest ever seizure of vapes accounted for about 0.75% of the market. So that's a rounding error as far as these organised crime groups are concerned, and they're in a very comfortable position to absorb those losses.
Yeah. I'll just go very quickly to Dr. Wodak, given that I know we're really stressed for time. Dr. Wodak, you've stated publicly that nicotine in vapes is not very addictive. Can you then explain to me why observational studies of people vaping have recorded puff frequencies that are about 400% and more higher than those observed in smokers?
Well, I base my observations on medical research and the attractiveness of cigarette smoking to people who are cigarette smokers. That attraction to nicotine, which some people call addiction, some people call dependence. Anyway, whatever it is, when they switch from cigarettes to vaping, that entity decreases. There's lots of research to show that. The puffing frequency is a poor guide to addictiveness. It's really symptoms like withdrawal symptoms, for example, that are a better guide to how addictive a property is, a particular chemical is. The puffing frequency, and I'm surprised at the figure you quoted of 400%, but really all that reflects is the way in which the person who is vaping is trying to get as much nicotine as they used to get from when they were smoking. And with most vaping devices, the nicotine delivered is significantly less than they were getting from smoking. There are some on the market now where it is very close to or equal to what they were getting from smoking. And the more nicotine they're getting from vaping, the lower their puffing frequency.
Okay. Chair, I might leave it there and give others a go because I know we're really running short. Thanks.
Thank you. Senator Kovacic.
Thank you all for your time and your evidence, and in particular, the information around illicit vape. So I'm after your insights as to how realistic do you think it is that effectively this legislation banning all vapes aside from prescription vapes will actually just cause people to stop vaping or go get a prescription for a vape? Is this realistically something that you feel will happen?
I could answer that if I may. Look, I think it's a complete fantasy, and it's a fantasy on several levels. As Dr. Martin has suggested to you already, if there is a strong demand for some substance or for offside betting on races or for buying sex work, whatever it is, if there's a strong demand for it, and if it's easy to subvert the controls on that good or service, the trade will flourish. And that's exactly what we're seeing here. And the more that the government is piling on severer and more severe restrictions, the more severe the unintended consequences. It's as simple as that. But look, we're basically dealing with a problem where we've got something like 7.8 million containers entering Australia every year. and we have the capacity to search 100,800 of those 7.8 million containers. Most of the vapes are coming in containers. Could anyone believe that that system could actually work? We've got 27,000 kilometres of coastline, most of it deserted. We've got billions of parcels arriving in Australia every year. I would suggest to you that if unlimited resources were given to law enforcement authorities, we'd still not be able to stem the supply.
Yeah, I'd echo Dr. Wodak's comments there. And I'd add an additional challenge. I mean, yes, most of the illicit vapes that we've got, the disposable ones, come from China. China's our largest trading partner. We import around 20 million tonnes of products from China every year. That's a hell of a haystack to hide a needle in. But also, these supply lines are already entrenched and established now. The prescription model has already failed. 9 out of 10 vapers are already sourcing their products illegally. For this to work, you would have to have some aspect of the policy that attracted vapers back into the legal market. And at the moment, with the restrictions on flavours, the restrictions on devices that vapers actually want to use, I don't see any realistic possibility of that happening. I will also add that enforcement doesn't just happen at the border; it happens, at the street or state level as well. We've heard from Mr. Webber about police concerns there. This won't be able to be done without police either. You can't send health compliance officers into stores that are owned by organised crime groups. There's just too much risk associated with that. So trying to enforce these laws at a retail level would be extraordinarily resource intensive, and the only outcome of that would be to drive the trade underground. We know that teens can access vapes; they can also access cannabis. The illegal drugs that we have would be, a good, similarity with what we would expect to see with vapes if there was a similar crackdown to take place.
I'd be interested in any of your insights onto then what you believe would be a good mechanism in order, because most of this is obviously focused on the fact that people don't want children to vape or to start vaping. We don't want 12, 13, 14-year-olds vaping at school or anywhere for that matter. What kind of mechanisms can we put in place, and is banning the disposable vape perhaps a better alternative than banning altogether?
I think we've got the answer from that in New Zealand. New Zealand and Australia for decades had very similar policies and very similar outcomes from their tobacco control policies. Australia had slightly lower smoking rates, and that had all changed in New Zealand in August 2020 when the four major parties decided to back the kind of arrangements that Dr. Martin outlined already to you. And what's happened in New Zealand is that on some but not all measures, the vaping rates amongst New Zealand youth are falling, but just as significantly, or in my view even more significantly, the smoking rate in New Zealand is falling at twice the rate as the smoking rate is falling in Australia. And the focus really should be on reducing the smoking rate, in my view, should be on reducing the smoking rate in older smokers, because they're the ones at risk of getting cancer, heart disease and lung disease and dying within a few years. I don't want to see any young people in Australia or elsewhere vaping, but really that's a problem that is low risk, much lower risk than smoking, and we've got decades to deal with that. We don't have that luxury of time dealing with the older smokers. They're going to get cancer, heart or lung disease and die from it in the next few years. We have 21,000 deaths from Australian smokers every year. That should be the focus. So I don't think the problem really is as difficult as many people suggest. New Zealand, I would suggest, is really where we should be looking for answers. New Zealand and especially also the United Kingdom.
Thank you.
I'd agree with Dr. Yeah, I'd agree with Dr. Wodak's comments there. I would also say as well, in terms of tackling the black market, if, for example, we heard in the previous panel session from legitimate vaping retailers in the country and how their business model has been negatively impacted here, a huge amount of that market share of those businesses that will be shut down will go to the black market. If those businesses were to be able to go back to a previous arrangement, or even better, something along the lines of a New Zealand model, that decreases demand for black market products. That's what sucks oxygen out of the black market, decreases profitability available for organised crime. And it also frees up law enforcement and compliance measures to focus on the dodgy operators. So, you're on the one hand undermining the demand, which is going to reduce the profits available to them, and diverting that back into legal, regulated and taxable products.
Thank you. I'm going to pass the call to Senator Steele-John now.
Thanks very much, Chair. Could I ask a question, first of all, to Dr. Martin? What do you see as the impact of the reversal of the burden of proof on consumers or people suspected of supplying vaping products?
I'm sorry, Senator, I don't quite understand the question, the burden of proof.
So what we've heard from witnesses today and yesterday is that there is an element of the legislation which reverses the onus of proof to enable, basically to enable an enforcement individual to require that a person provide evidence that they are in the possession of a prescribed vape, a prescribed product. So my question to you is in your view, what impact do you see this reversal having on consumers or people suspected of being consumers?
Right. Thanks, Senator. Yeah, I think the main problem here, and again, I think Mr. Webber alluded to this from a police perspective, is just the practicality of enforcing that. And so you'd have police officers, wandering around places where vapes are consumed, asking people for their prescriptions. That's an incredibly onerous and burdensome thing to do. And what happens, of course, in those instances where someone doesn't have their prescription on them, I just don't see any other realistic, parallel where police officers would be asking people for whatever medical prescriptions or papers they have on them at one time, and whether police would even be comfortable in enforcing the law like that. That really does look like a nanny state. Or even worse comparisons that people can make there. Police officers don't want to wander around presumably asking people for their papers.
And to the Police Federation of Australia, a common objection to this bill is that it will result in consumers of vaping products being arrested. Is it correct that this would give the power, as currently written, the power to arrest individuals?
Look, there's always a power of arrest in regards to any form of ticket or enforcement. But in saying that, the police officers around the country go out of their way not to arrest people. If we streamlined the process and made it seriously, just like the liquor licensing laws, we could issue infringement notices and progress it further. There'd be probably issues in regards to identification, especially if they didn't have an appropriate ID. But in saying that, look, police officers in the current form of the legislation and also even the funding, we don't have the training, the knowledge, and also the time to actually go and ask the individuals. I think the major focus for us, Senator, is actually cutting it off at the source. So that is going to those illicit premises that are actually selling illegal vapes, that don't have a correct licence, that actually are getting it illegally, run by organised crime. That is our major focus. So we're not going to look at the individual person out on the street that wants to have a mango vape in the afternoon after work. What we want to do is go to that premises that's run by an outlaw motorcycle gang who's intimidating, local communities, threatening local businesses, and go in there and say, hang on a minute, are you a fit and proper person to run this business? No, you're not. Do you have a license to actually run this sell tobacco? No, you don't. Is the tobacco or the vapes actually, properly regulated? And no, it's not. So ticket, and we give a ticket to the owner of the business, the person that's selling it, and we confiscate all those items that are there for sale. That's probably our major focus. In regards to the average person walking down the street having a disposable vape or another vape, it is just not going to come up on our radar. I just cannot see that occurring in the present environment. And also, we do not have the training or actually the workload would restrict it. We're going to do things that are 10 times more important. And the other thing, your constituents from any local electorate, they're going to say to the police officer, why are you bothering my son, daughter, or my friend, husband in regards to a vape when you should be locking up the person that broke into the local pub or broke into the house or the domestic violence situation down the street? I think that's where the premise is coming from us.
Mr. Webber, thank you for that. And I hear that evidence that you've shared with us, and also it's important to combine it with the statement of the author of the bill, in this case being the Minister and the Department, that's not the intent of the legislation. As currently written, the distinction, as far as we've been told as a committee, between where you would be able to issue that infringement notice, that fine, however you end up operationalising this policy, and the ability of that individual to apply for an exemption is the quantity that they are found in their position, the commercial quantity. So it is the case that if an individual was found by an officer or an enforcement agent to have a commercial quantity in their possession, you would be granted under this legislation the power to arrest them, correct?
Well, Senator, the only time that person would come under our notice if they committed another offence. I don't think there's a police officer across the country that would actually legitimately go and target someone who's having a vape, regardless that it is banned and illicit. It's just not going to happen. I mean, a prime example, as you well know, when you go to Canberra, like all drugs there are decriminalised, but now we're talking about illicit vapes having more of a punitive effect. Again, I'm going to get down to the real nuts and bolts of this.
Of course, and I hear that. I'm just conscious of time, and I do accept what you're sharing with us. I just need to ask you a final question, though, is beyond the practicalities and the intent that I hear from you, is there a barrier that you've been able to identify within the bill that would prevent an officer from arresting a individual with a commercial quantity in their possession as currently written in the bill?
Look, yeah, police can, regardless of the tickets or the legislation, police can arrest anyone in regards to taking to a police station to ascertain, the ID and investigating further. Of course, we could arrest, but I think that would be highly unlikely, Senator.
Senator,
Thank you,
thanks for the call. I'm going to Senator Cadell and then Canavan. Senator Cadell, just noting we are running a bit behind.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks very much for your evidence. Mr. Webber, just quickly to you, in summary, police force does amazing work, a lot of work, so much more so, especially this week, noticing domestic violence. With the resources you have, with the training you have now, with all the other demands on you, could you enforce this to eliminate illegal vaping in these laws across the country?
No, not at all.
Thank you very much. Dr. Martin, thank you for your evidence. You've the government and the people here have trotted out everyone that this is all about the kids. None of us want to see kids vaping, but they're saying that the industry has forced tobacco and vaping onto the kids. What has organised crime done about kids and vaping?
Yeah, that's a great question. Thanks, Senator. This has been one of the most frustrating things watching this debate from a criminological perspective. This really looks like a classic case of moral panic as far as criminologists are concerned, where we have an exaggeration over the threat to a particular group. As you say, teen vaping is a concern. But over 70% of teens, according to the government's own statistics, have never tried a vape. Just 3.5% of teens vape daily. That's lower than the proportion of teens who were smoking daily a decade ago. And in terms of accessing the black market, well, this has occurred under a model in which the black market has thrived. Teens find it easier to access products from black markets, not harder, because the legitimate retailers who we've heard from before, they don't sell to underage people, but the black market is very happy to. They don't respect age restrictions. And of course, the products that they're getting have much, much higher levels of nicotine and other adulterants as well than are available from legitimate retailers. So they're more addictive than the products that are available.
Formaldehyde in some, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and particularly sky-high levels of nicotine. So they're getting more easily addicted to the black market products than they would be if they could get their hands on a legitimate one. So from this, a teen perspective, the black market presents way more of a danger to teens, in my view, than having a legal regulated market would.
So my view, personal view, so I don't want to push it onto you, is that with this bill, the government is being seen to do something, but really outsourcing the health outcomes for our youth and our people who want to quit smoking to outlaw motorcycle gangs and organised Asian gangs. Am I reading that completely wrong?
No, I'd have a very similar perspective, and I have a lot of sympathy for the position that border force and law enforcement would be put into if this bill passed. This isn't my criticisms on the limitations of what law enforcement could achieve, and not a criticism of law enforcement personnel. This is a strategy that they would be required to follow, but it's a misinformed strategy, and it will not achieve its outcomes. And we know that because of what we see with other illegal drugs.
Along the lines of what Mr. Webber was saying, do you think Australians would be more pleased seeing their police force out there eliminating keeping women safe, keeping domestic violence victims safe, or picking up people who have vapes?
Yeah, absolutely. That's right. I mean, this is particularly vapes. I was in the UK a couple of weeks ago. I was in New Zealand over Christmas. You see vapes being sold there, and not just sold, but being advocated by public health departments, public health agencies as a less harmful alternative. And frankly, I find it absolutely ludicrous that you could walk into any supermarket or corner store and buy a packet of cigarettes, but there are all of these obstacles in the way to get legal vapes. Of course, illegal vapes are very easy to access, and that, of course, is the heart of all the problems that we're talking about.
You mentioned, I think, estimated value of the industry at $2 billion. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's a conservative estimate, yeah.
That's bigger than the Australian Federal Police annual budget for last year.
Yeah, and this is exactly what we see in terms of the war on drugs more generally. The profits, essentially, this is not a criminal problem. This is an economic problem. With demand at those kind of levels, there is no level of government intervention that is feasible that can impact the profitability of the illicit trade in vapes and tobacco. And you can conflate those markets because it's the same organised crime groups who are involved with supplying illicit tobacco and illicit vapes, and as well as other illegal drugs. So yeah, it's an absolute disaster, and I don't think it is feasible in any sense.
Dr. Wodak, last question to you. This feels very much like I'm watching a 1930s movie. I've got a country like America that's all neighbours sell a product. It's not even illegal in most countries like cocaine or heroin, and that still gets here. All of our neighbours have this product available and sellable. How can we stop this? Will we stop this, and should we stop this?
And stop it. And you're right to put this in as a choice between desirability of trying to do this or the feasibility. And it's the feasibility that really matters. Australia does, the Commonwealth Government commissions a survey every year of people who use drugs and asks them how difficult or easy it was to obtain heroin, cocaine, amphetamines, cannabis, etc. And the last year, I think 87% of people who responded said getting hold of heroin was either easy or very easy. And I believe that vaping would be even easier to get than heroin.
So I've always taught in my Law 101 school, which I failed a number of times, that a law has to be clear, concise and enforceable. This is not enforceable, is it?
It isn't.
Okay, thank you, Chair.
Senator Canavan.
Thank you very much, Chair. And look, my question is to Mr. Webber. And first, just want to thank you, Mr. Webber, and thank all your members for their service as police officers to our nation. You said to Senator Cadell that I think you remarked that you didn't think police had the resources to implement the government's model. I mean, given we're in a situation of high rates of domestic violence, youth crime, terrorism as well now, I mean, what does this mean for police resources then? If governments are to say we need you to go and raid these vape shops, does that, with scarce resources, does that necessarily mean you have fewer resources to tackle those other issues facing our community?
Yeah, well, totally, Senator. The only way this would work if the Commonwealth, as I put in the submission from the Police Federation of Australia, the only way would this work if the Commonwealth actually funded that strike force and made it outside of the normal police budget. But it'd have to be in regards to, a regulatory licensing network where we could actually enforce proper, fit and proper people that actually are delivering, the tobacco or the vapes. On top of that too, we need to have the systems in place to issue tickets, but that hasn't come to fruition. So at the present moment, no, and I'll keep coming down to, and it comes back to some of your previous speakers where they highlighted, well, hang on a minute, I saw a police car around the corner. It is just not visible on our radar. We don't have training for it. We don't know how to deal with it. And at the present moment, we've got so many other priorities to deal with. So from a policing point of view, no, it's not workable in the current structure. We do welcome if there was a proper licensing regime in place that actually could administer this, where we actually had clear guidelines and clear policy on top of that too, and we could enforce it in that possible way. But again, when police officers out on the street are going to premises and confiscating the illicit vapes or illicit tobacco, it's already too late. So I think prevention, and I'll keep coming back to my initial comments at the start. What is the government policy? The policy here is to reduce the risk of nicotine. That's what I think, as a layman police officer's terms. This legislation is not doing that. If anything, we've turned a health issue into a crime issue, and we can just see that in numerous amount of states. It is not working, so we need to go back to the health issue. Now, what that means in regards to taxations and policies, that's not for me to decide. The police will actually enforce the law of the land on any given day, but this legislation, the way it's sitting and the philosophy behind it, is this flawed for us, and it doesn't work.
Can I just quickly ask a follow-up? How much do you have a cost on that strike force and it's needed? And did any of the state police jurisdictions meet with the federal department to discuss these issues before the model and maybe cost something up of what was needed?
Look, it'd probably be at the absolute most over 4 years, about $30 million, which is a drop in the ocean. And I know we touched upon $2 billion, and to my understanding, that's $2 billion lost in revenue. The other thing that we're starting to see now is that we don't know how many people are using, nicotine products, because it's just not, it's not coming up on the radar because the taxation is not there like it used to be. So you've had a market in regards to taxation tobacco to an extreme where you created a illicit market where organised crime's got involved. They're actually turning honest people into alleged criminals or putting them through the criminal system, which we don't want to occur either. And again, as I said, Senator, before, 10 years ago, I never thought I'd be ever talking about this issue. The only time we ever dealt with tobacco was when it was selling to underage people. Now we're talking about an entire population of Australians that use nicotine products that are going to come under the eyes of law enforcement. That's something we don't want. It's something we can't do. And again, when we come to a resource and supply and demand issue for our calls for service, it's just not going to be on the radar. Again, our members would much rather deal with serious offences instead of dealing with these issues, which, as far as we're concerned, is a health issue.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Mr. Webber.